Okay, hi and welcome everyone. My name is Steve Pletcher. I am the chair of the Otolaryngology Program Directors Organization, and I'm the program director at the University of California, San Francisco. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our OPDO recruitment webinar. And I'm going to share my screen here and pull up our slides. Okay, great. Everybody seeing that okay? Good.
Yep.
So, great. Also here today we have Eric Dobratz, who's the program director at Eastern Virginia Medical School, recently associated with Old Dominion University. And Judy Liu, who's the program director at Washington University, and Brett Comer, who's the program director at Kentucky. Brett's on call, so he may be called away, but we'll see if he makes it through the session with us. We're all members of the OPDO Council. In this webinar, we're going to use the Q&A function on Zoom, so feel free to put any questions into that Q&A session. Some of them we may answer as we're speaking. Others, we should have plenty of time for just a devoted Q&A session at the end, so others will answer live and discuss. And then we are recording this session that should be available on our website later this week. And thank you again for joining us. I also want to thank Beth, and Colleen, who are our administrative partners. They've helped us on the initiation of a website upgrade. And there's our website there. I encourage everyone to take a look at that. There's a lot of information on there about these recruitment topics specifically. So anything that you want to review should be available there. We'll look to put our slides from this talk up as well, and we will also put a video of this session up there. So for tonight's agenda, we'll talk a little bit about interview format and maybe give you a little bit of a sense of what to expect this year, although we don't have specific details on what programs will do with respect to virtual versus in-person interviews. We'll also talk about preference signaling and our plan for this year and a little bit about the background and rationale for that. And then we'll finish our specific topics with the combined interview offer date discussion and some dates related to that, and move into the Q&A session. So with that, we'll turn it over to Eric to talk about interview format.
Great, thanks, Steve. And hello, everybody. I'm glad to give you a little bit of an update about where we kind of came to our decision as a specialty on our advice to programs as far as interview formats. And just to give a little bit of a background, so for many, I mean, for all specialties, interviews were all in person. And then with COVID, and I would say even before COVID, there was some kind of discussion about, should we consider virtual interview formats, web-based communication was becoming, easier and thoughts about doing that. And then COVID kind of really got everybody familiar with web-based conferencing and also just for, health and safety concerns, everybody moved to a virtual interview format. For a number of years after that, when we were, kind of out of the, somewhat out of the woods with COVID, the AAMC still had recommendations for some of these other reasons, such as financial reasons, equity-based reasons, and to consider virtual interviews. In otolaryngology, being a relatively small specialty with smaller programs and longer duration of residency, we wondered if that was best for our candidates, but didn't really know. And so there wasn't really any proof or scientific data to show what some of these thought processes about interview formats really were, kind of how it was affecting the applicant pool and the applicants and the programs. And so what we decided to do was last year, when we made a decision as a specialty not to kind of make one recommendation over another as far as virtual or in-person interviews and just kind of leave it up to the programs and their institutions to decide, it came out that about half and half, about half of the programs ended up doing virtual. Many of those based on their institution's recommendations, and then about half of the programs ended up doing in-person interviews. So we at the OPDO thought that would be a great opportunity to actually try to do some research and get the perspectives of our applicants who participated in these dual kind of format interviews, which is really the only specialty to have such a kind of almost an equal distribution of candidates performing both types of formats. And so we thought that was a unique opportunity to kind of try to get some data. So we did. We developed a survey with the AAMC where the surveys went out to all of the applicants from last year who interviewed in otolaryngology. And we had about a 40% response rate, which for survey type research studies is a pretty good response rate. The data that came back from that survey was a strong preference for in-person interviews from the applicants from last year who participated in about half and half. We did have some open-ended questions about, thoughts about the different formats, and there was a desire for cost sharing or financial support options during the interview process but applicants had desired that from programs. This is just, there's two slides I have with actual data percentages listed, and this is one that we pulled out that we felt was very important in kind of guide for programs and guiding their decisions on which format they wanted to do. And with the applicants, considering all pros and cons, their preference for interview format was very strong in person. 72% of the respondents preferred in person when looking at all the pros and cons of the various formats. About 12% preferred virtual, and about 16% had no preference. The other question that we looked at, now there was more responses and more data that we will end up putting out in a study at some point. But just for these purposes, we pulled out two of the kind of bigger questions. And the other one was, did the interview format impact your ranking decisions? And for about 60% of the applicants, they said that their experience on in-person interviews made them more likely to rank the in-person interview programs more favorably. Whereas about 40% said interview format did not impact their ranking decisions, and only 3% felt that virtual interviews made them more likely to rank programs more favorably. So we as a specialty have kind of put out a statement to all of the programs and program directors and chairs that we are not going to make a strong recommendation, and instead we are basically stating that we believe it's critical that all otolaryngology programs have the opportunity to conduct in-person interviews. Now, the reason for that wording is mainly the deans of institutions are looking for specialties that kind of give more specific guidance. And so our guidance based on the data from the study that we did showed a strong preference of applicants towards in-person interviews. And so we wanted programs to not feel left out from having the ability to do that if that was their desire. And I really don't think 100% of our programs will do in-person interviews. My guess is it might be a little bit more than 50-50 this year, maybe a little bit more towards in-person based on the feedback from the applicants last year. But I'm sure there will still be some programs that do virtual interviews. So that, as the OPDO, SUO is the Society of University Otolaryngologists, and the chairs, the AADO organization, kind of jointly made that statement, and that's kind of where we're at.
Great. Thank you, Eric. So we'll move on into preference signaling. For those of you who don't know, preference signaling began in otolaryngology in the 2021 application cycle, and that was the COVID year. As the years went on, the number of signals that we used changed a little bit. We used 5 in the initial year, and then moved to 4 and 7 in the following years, mostly related to changes in restrictions on away rotations during those times, as well as changes in guidance and signaling home and away programs. And then last year, for the first time, we transitioned to a high signal approach where applicants were given 25 signals to use. And just a little general background with signaling, Having an application that's sent with a signal, the data shows does markedly increase the likelihood of receiving an interview from the program that you send that to. It also, signaling as a whole, provides a better distribution of interview offers, both across the candidate group and across programs as well. And we've also seen that the benefits of signaling are present across different demographic groups. This is the current state of preference signaling, with almost every specialty using preference signaling now. You can see there's quite a wide range of the number of signals used. And then there are also several programs that use a tiered signaling approach, where they have a combination of gold and silver signals, or sort of the higher first tier and second tier signaling. We don't have any tiered signaling, but we do use a high signal approach with 25. So this is our first and actually only frequently asked question here for this webinar, which is, do I signal home and away programs? I think this is a really important question. I want to highlight it very clearly and also give a very clear answer, and the answer is yes. So applicants are expected to signal home and away rotation programs, unless you wish to prioritize other programs. So if you do an away rotation and you finish and you're like, wow, not really interested in that program anymore, you definitely don't need to signal them. But if you do an away rotation and you remain interested in that program and you want to have a nice opportunity to receive an interview offer and potentially match there, then you are expected to signal that program. And this is really a decision that's made for equity reasons. We have a number of applicants who do not have home programs. We also have a number of applicants who are restricted for a variety of reasons in the number of away rotations they're able to complete. And so using this approach, which is recommended by the AAMC, allows some additional benefit to those students who don't have a home and away programs, as they can kind of substitute a signal for those programs. So I'll turn it over to Judy now to talk about why we're at the 25 signal approach.
Yeah, so why we're at 25 signals and transition from a lower signal program is that what we saw is that students on average applied to 86 programs for the 2023 cycle. And that there had been seen, I'll show you in a bit, a figure showing that the number of applications per student had gone up steadily. And we recognize that this is costly and inefficient for both you as students as well as for us on the program side. As you can imagine, trying to read every application from all the students who are submitting applications, it takes a lot of time, and we know that it's not easy for you as well. So what we found is that there is the potential to decrease the number of applications submitted per student by decreasing the value of non-signal applications. So if you have a higher number of signals, then you're able to transmit your interest to the program in a more distributed fashion. And so it would also benefit the programs, because we saw that there was some programs that had a lot of signals and a lot of programs that didn't have hardly any signals. So that was hard for them to make real decisions about who to interview based on those signals. So again, we wanted to change that. So last year we moved to 25 signals in otolaryngology. And what you see on this graph is there are 123 individual programs that are on the bottom. And you can see they're ordered from those who received the most applications in the light blue, over 600, to the least, and that looks like it's around 100, a little bit over 100. But the number of dark blue is the number of program signals, and they range from a little bit over 200 to I think down around 50 is my guess, except for that one program at the end. And if you consider that there are 130 total otolaryngology programs, this represents almost all programs around the country. So what we see is that most programs received a decent number of signals so that they can really use that to gauge a student's interest in their program. And so this was definitely seen as more equitable and something that was more interesting to us, as well as hopefully showed your interest in the programs. Furthermore, there was some data that was analyzed back in at the very end of December, showing that when you sent a signal, that you were much more likely to get an interview offer. 42% was the median, but then among those who did not send a signal, that they got an interview offer from 2% of those programs. So it seemed very advantageous for an applicant to send a signal, to transmit information about their interest in that program, because it would be much less likely that you would get an interview offer. So that's going to be one of the take-home messages is, please signal, so we know that you're interested in us. So, and then why do we get to 25 signals? Again, this graph also further shows this. So the dark kind of yellow orange block is the total number of applicants in ERAS to otolaryngology. So last year, in 2024, it was 573. The dotted red line is the actual number of otolaryngology positions offered across the country. And even though that's gone up over the years, it certainly isn't as high as the number of applicants. So what you see on the bottom green dotted line is the average number of applications per applicant. And so that had increased steadily from 49 in 2011 up to 86 in 2022 and 2023. When it became clear that we were going to a higher signal approach, I think most people understood and the programs understood that we were going to be focusing more of our interest on those who actually had signaled the program. And so the number of applications dropped to 59 per applicant. And I think that is a good drop because if you look at the blue line, which is the number of applications that a program received on average, it had got as high as 427, which is an awful number for us to try to get through, down to a more manageable number of 258 last year, so that we can actually pay attention to everyone's application, read them thoroughly rather than just go through them as quickly as possible. So that's why we arrived at 25 signals or decided to continue with 25 signals this year, because it was seen as being a very successful outcome on both the applicant side as well as on the program side. So take home signal is please use 25 signals. Let the programs know whether you're interested in them or not. So do signal both your home and away rotation programs if you are very interested in interviewing and matching with them. And so we are also trying on the program end to increase transparency for applicants. So there are some programs who have stated that we do not anticipate interviewing any applicants who do not send us a signal. So if that's the case, you've got to decide whether you want to use a signal or not. For the future, we hope that we will be able to be more transparent about the range of signals that we receive, and whether or not we anticipate interviewing only applicants who send a signal, or we're interested in looking at people who do not. So we hope to use this in a way that benefits all of the applicants as well as other programs. Thanks, and I think goes down to Brett.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. I'll just comment briefly on the transparency side. I think it's I think now it's a good time to start. In that we didn't interview any applicants last year who didn't signal us, and I would anticipate the same thing again at UCSF. And I know that that can sound kind of harsh, but I think it's actually the right thing to do for both applicants and programs to be very clear about this. It saves applicants time, money, and stress to just sort of have a clear understanding what to expect from programs. And with the 25 signal approach, just the number of signals that we received from candidates who were extremely qualified was significantly exceeded the number of interview slots that we had, and I would anticipate a similar finding again this year. So with that, we'll turn it over to Brett for the combined interview offer date information.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Can we flip it to the next slide? Yeah. So the combined interview offer date has a little bit of history behind it, and we kind of modeled this off a couple other specialties. But for this year, the combined date will be on November the 8th at noon Eastern Standard Time. That's a Friday. And what will happen that the interview offers will go out that day from programs, and then applicants will purposely have the weekend and Monday to kind of think about things. And then starting on Tuesday, the 12th at noon, that's when interview can begin to get scheduled. Now, this is a system that's on your honor for programs and applicants, but we do ask that people, both on the program side and the applicant side, adhere to this. The anecdotal feedback from a lot of medical students from last year and programs is that this seemed to work very well because it takes the pressure off and lessens the number of people who are just accepting or over accepting interview offers and then maybe jettison those later. We do ask that programs do not send out more offers than they have for interview slots. And we, on the applicant side of things, we also ask that applicants try not to schedule conflicting interview offers or interviews such that it will give some equity across applicants. And that's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Brett. So we are a little before 6 o'clock, and we'll move into our Q&A session. Let me open up that spot here, and it looks like we have first question. What are some important considerations for reapplicants gearing up for a successful cycle? So I will just open that up to the group. Judy, Eric, comments to start?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, I think mentorship is key in any applicants getting ready for the application cycle to guide you, on, whether it's a reapplication or an initial application on your kind of strengths and weaknesses that you have, and to consider, which programs you're going to be looking towards and kind of guiding you towards competitiveness of programs based on your kind of perceived competitiveness. We as otolaryngology programs are really working towards, holistic review of applications and trying to really kind of evaluate applicants far beyond numbers. And so how can you prepare your application to highlight significant things about yourself that are unique, things that you've overcome in your past, or things that kind of make you who you are. Other applicants, being able to kind of find those things out and portray them through your application and your interview process are key. So really kind of sitting down with good mentors that can kind of talk through some of those things with you, I think would be very helpful in trying to show programs kind of unique things that you have to offer.
Yeah, with the reorganization of the ERAS application last year, I think it's more important than ever to highlight what's important rather than a laundry list of things that you've done. And then, seek guidance on which programs you want to apply to, and definitely use those 25 preference signals that we mentioned.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think, it's always important for a little self-reflection and getting some feedback from mentors who you had during the first cycle through. I think also programs look for, what you did during your since the last application cycle. And I think, you know, kind of highlighting things that you've learned going through the process and the strengths that you bring to a program are really, really key factors there as well. Next one, what are your recommendations for using geographic preference signaling? Is there a situation in which this should or should not be used? So maybe I'll start with that one. First of all, I think there's some question about whether geographic signaling will be live again for our specialty in the upcoming year. And I'll put my my bias out there initially is that I really don't like having both geographic preferences and preference signaling in the same application cycle. I think that it's easy for applicants with 25 signals to express their geographic preference through those signals, and that adding an additional geographic preference onto that just adds unnecessary complication. So I'm hopeful that we can remove that from the process last year. And I think some of the data, we don't have perfect data from otolaryngology from this past year, but data from specialties with a high signal approach the year before that, it was specifically orthopedics, showed a few important things. One is that when you have geographic preferences, you can mark your geographic regions of preference, and you have several of those you can choose. And if you do decide to use your geographic preferences, you should use as many geographic options as are available to you. Number two, you can also say that you choose to say you have no preference. And that's the data from orthopedics showed that if your signal was concordant with a geographic preference, meaning you said, yes, I have geographic preferences and here this is, and I'm sending a signal to this program and it's within my geographic preference, your likelihood of an interview offer was the same as if you sent a signal and you said, I have no geographic preference. So, but if you had your geographic preferences in that were discordant with where you were sending your program signal, then your interview offer rate dropped. So generally, based on that data, the recommendation was either say you have no preference or use all of your preference signals within the geographic locations that you select. So it gets a little bit complicated, and again, that's why I would, I hope that we don't have to deal with this next year. I think a reasonable option is to, if we do have geographic preferences, is to just say you have no geographic preference and use your signals to speak for themselves. I think that's the easiest thing to do. The final thing I'll say about that is that if you leave the question blank and don't specifically say that you have no geographic preference, it looks to programs like you selected other preference areas. So don't just skip it if it's there. Say you have no preference. So sorry for the long answer, complicated. Hopefully we won't have to deal with it. How many programs do you anticipate to switch to in-person by the next 2 to 3 years? Let's take that for the next 1 year, and then maybe we'll go the next 2 to 3 years. So we'll take a poll of the panel, and this is being recorded. So whoever wins this poll will win something. I don't know what it is yet. We'll figure it out. Brett, you want to go first?
Yeah,
so percentage of programs that will be in person.
I'm gonna guess it's gonna go up to about 2/3 this year, if not 70% or so.
Okay, you got to pin down 2/3 to 70%. There's going to be a lot on the line.
All right, I got 70%.
70%. Judy.
I was going to say 70% too. I'll go up to 75.
75. Eric.
70 was my number. I'll go with 72.
Okay, I'm going to go 85% in person. All right, here we are on the record. I think probably my suspicion is that might creep up a little bit in following years, but hard to know.
I think there's probably still going to be some institutions that don't allow programs to do it. But I think the vast majority of programs that are able to do it are going to go to in person. And I think, obviously the applicants the data that we shared and the applicant's preference towards it is weighing heavily. But I think also programs' feelings that, we are a small specialty. It's 5 years that you're spending in this place. We really want you to be able to come and see our place and see our department and get to know the people here. It's really hard to do kind of informal kind of social gatherings via Zoom. And I think that resident applicants really do glean a lot from those types of interactions that are done in in-person interviews. And so we really wanted to be able to kind of allow for that. And so I think those are a lot of the reasons why there's a push towards that.
All right. Judy, I'm going to give you this next one. Given the low yield on interviews for non-signaled programs, are you recommending that students apply to only their 25 signaled programs?
So I know that there are programs and program directors who are definitely recommending only the 25. For the students that I mentor, I'm saying I would say no more than another 10, just because if they are interested in a REACH program, or if they're interested in research programs and they're just not sure, then they may want to apply a little bit more widely. But otherwise, I think a lot of the programs will try to stick to the applicants who prefer signaling them. So I don't know how much value there is in additional applications. Again, that's just my opinion. That's the advice that I give my students.
Brett, thoughts?
I agree with that. I would go a little bit more than 25. I would probably go in the 40 to 50 range this year until we get a little bit more data. And then next year at this time, we may be having a different conversation, telling people only, apply to 30, 35 programs. But with 1 year of data, I don't know that I would go just at the number of signals only at 25.
Eric?
I mean, the data shows pretty strongly that programs aren't looking at, that's not to say that no programs are looking outside of it. And it may be that, I'm always impressed at how savvy the students are on AutoMatch. And my guess is if programs are listing that they're only going to look at signals, that's going to find its way to some sort of web page on AutoMatch that says that, and then programs that are looking outside of it will say that, that'll be on this kind of list. And my guess is the programs that are looking outside will get a reasonable number, and the people that are saying they're really only going to look at their signals probably won't get a lot. And maybe that's what should happen, right? And so I think, but my guess is that's kind of how that'll all play out over the next year. And as you're deciding, you're probably going to look at the websites. And as Steve said, if we're encouraging programs to list that, then use that information and kind of help it guide your decision making. I mean, if you're interested in not signaling a program and they've listed that they're only looking at signals, then it's probably not worth your money and kind of using that spot as another application.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that said. I think and I'll just highlight what Judy said about research track programs too, because I think research tracks often have a little bit of a different dynamic in terms of the application process. And so I think that's good advice in general, kind of signals. And then if you're interested, signal that or apply to the 25 signals, then if there are research tracks that you're interested in, apply to those as well. I think it's a little tricky because you think, okay, well, maybe I'll, I think generally in the applicant's mind, the idea is like, I want to make sure I match. And so if I apply more, I'm going to be able to match. And so maybe I'll send out a few applications to programs that may be perceived as being less competitive. But I think the bottom line is, if your real goal is to match, some of those programs are the programs that you should be signaling, because that's how you really catch their attention. So there is still, some uncertainty there, but I think 25 plus a few more is a reasonable approach. Is there a step 2 score cutoff that will be used by programs to screen applications? How will this score be used in admissions now that step 1 is pass fail? Open that up to the group. Eric.
So, I mean, there's never been any recommended cutoff by any, organization. OPDO certainly would never recommend programs having something like that. Do programs have cutoffs? I'm sure they're out there. And my guess is those programs transition their cutoff from step 1 to step 2. But it's certainly not any recommendation that we have as an organization would ever have. Are there programs out there that do it? Yes, I'm sure there are. I don't know what number they would use or how to guide you on that, because it's certainly not anything that I would recommend or this organization would recommend.
And I would just say AAMC, does recommend holistic review. And I think most programs, or at least many programs, do take that into account. Like, for instance, in our program, we actually read every single application that comes through. So it doesn't matter what the step 1 or step 2 score was, we would read every single one. And that's been something we've done for as long as I've been a faculty. Yeah.
I'll agree with that, we read every application as well. And what I'll tell you that if you have just, as an objective score, you have a little bit lower score, but you're stronger in other areas. I think a lot of programs take that into consideration. Nowadays that's called holistic review, but we've been doing that for a long time because it's pretty hard to have somebody who's excellent in just multiple areas. And so, take that to heart when you're doing your application, if maybe there's an area where you're a little less competitive.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I would just add the caveat that we review every application that and read every application that has a signal with it. And last year we didn't look at any that didn't have a signal, just because when we got through the signal ones, we were overflowing. So, I think just wanted to clarify that on our side. And we haven't had we've never had a step 1 or a step 2 cutoff. I think that there are some programs who probably do, but I think overall fewer in the step 2 score era than in the step 1 score era. What steps can applicants take to figure out the culture of a program other than looking at the website or doing an away rotation?
I'd recommend social media as well. I don't know if you include that with a website, but I think social media is probably where you're going to find out the culture more than just looking at a website, because it's going to be, probably have some videos and, lots of pictures that are, I know our social media is heavily kind of influenced or posted by our residents themselves. So you're really going to kind of get the culture in that. So that would be a recommendation I would have, is looking at social media sites.
Yeah, I'll add that I think the sort of content experts in this area are oftentimes the current residents. And so if you're able to, if any residents, if you're at an institution that has a residency program, it's really great if you can have a resident mentor. Generally, they've gone through the application process. Some of them have interviewed in person or virtually at a variety of different places. Many of them have friends at other institutions. And I think they're really a great source of knowledge for the kind of experience and culture at different programs. So I'd strongly recommend utilizing that resource.
I also recommend, talking to various faculty who may have come from different parts of the country or different programs as well. And they would have information about, what they know about each of the programs.
I know our program, we showed data from the anonymous ACGME surveys from the prior year, because there's questions on there such as, would you go to this program again, or something to that effect. And that's a way to find out what the residents think anonymously about their own program. And so it's kind of a surrogate marker for culture as well.
Great. So the next question has to do with the logistics of the interview release date and how it overlapped with orthopedics last year. And there was an ERAS crash, and what we're going to do about this year. So that's good information. I knew there was some scheduling challenges and a crash. I didn't recognize that it was thought to be due to a overlap with the orthopedics at the same time. I think that the ERAS system is also upgrading. Last year was the first year they partnered with Thalamus and did things. So hopefully they're in a position that will allow the capacity for both of our relatively small specialties to go at the same time, if that is indeed what the orthopedics team is doing. But we can reach out and kind of do a little more work in that area to try to make sure we don't create a stressful situation this year, because I can imagine that would not be fun. Is there a preference for using bullet points on ERAS where appropriate, such as activities, or do you prefer paragraph form? Maybe Brett, we could start with you on that one.
I don't know that I've ever thought about that, and I can't say that I have a preference on that. The one thing I will say is if you list an activity that there may be some ambiguity, or you feel like there's some explanation, I think definitely having a paragraph is going to be more advantageous in that case.
Judy, comments?
Yeah, I would echo what Brett has said, and it's nice to have a little bit of explanation, you know, if you have a bullet point, so we understand why it's there, you know, why it's important to you, why it's helps to show who you are and how we would want to get to know you.
And ERAS will have you determine kind of the 3 most impactful experiences that you had, and then there'll be more space for others. So just make sure, you know, those impactful experiences are certainly detailed, and how you feel they've kind of had a significant made a significant difference on kind of who you are.
Great. Next question we have: if a student is applying as a US MD senior but isn't a US citizen or permanent resident, some programs have an option to sponsor visas, some don't. Are these students at a disadvantage when it comes to programs finalizing their rank list due to their immigration status? So detailed question. I'll open it up to the group first. I have a couple comments too, if any thoughts, but.
We had this question come up in the spring, or a similar question come up in the spring, and at least at our institution, those decisions are made at the GME level, if not the institutional level. So it's not necessarily the program, because they're, at least at UK, there's got to be equity across all types of programs in terms of sponsorship. And so that is actually something as an applicant you will want to know ahead of time. And a lot of GME websites will delineate that, and or you can call the GME office there and ask specifically, you know, what type of visas are sponsored or not sponsored.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And that's just what I was going to say, is that that's generally a decision that's made at the institution GME level. And certainly if I were in that situation, I think knowing the answer to that before you're deciding where to signal would be valuable. Okay, another question about step 2 scoring cutoffs. I think I heard right that none of us have a step 2 cutoff. Is that correct? So I think we've got that one answered. What are your recommendations for generally introverted people to make better impressions on your program for interviews and away rotations? Judy, you want to start with that one?
Oh boy, personally, as an introverted person myself, I think you just want to go in with the attitude that you're, you know, wanting to get to know people, and that you're interested and curious about, you know, who you're meeting, what the program is like, and you know, you may want to practice with people who you know and trust, or with many schools will have options where you can kind of practice, you know, questions and meeting people, and you know, understanding that you are introverted, maybe a little more shy. It is a way to work on some of those skills that will help you succeed when you are, you know, in residency and when you're working as an attending at some point. So I would lean into the opportunity to gain skills rather than think that, you know, it's something that you have to just, you know, try to just get to gut it out. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to take the mantle of the introvert champion here, particularly on the away rotation side. I think introverts are oftentimes very observant. And I think that can really benefit you when you're on a rotation. And one of the things that can be very noticeable for residents and folks in a program when students are visiting is when they identify areas where they can help and are able to just sort of pitch in and do things to that make the day run more smoothly. You know, everyone's working hard, and whatever visiting students can do to kind of help the process and the machine work more easily can really be is oftentimes really noticed and really a mark in your favor. So I think I like the idea for the lean in to being an introvert, and yeah, you know, you want to get to know people and talk to people and all those things too, but really kind of champion that being observant and picking up on where you can contribute to the group. Okay, Judy, I'm going to give you the next one, which is our most research tracks a separate signal.
I believe most research tracks are, but not all. So our program is, but I know that there are a number of programs where they're not, and that they define who goes into the research track once they've matched. So that's going to be an important question for you to ask, or to look up on their research on their websites, or even ask a question of the program directors or program coordinators whether it's a separate track or not.
Yeah, I think that it may have changed somewhat when we moved preference signaling out of our own organization into ERAS, in that we used to, when it was through our own organization, we would allow programs to choose if they wanted to combine those for a single signal, sort of an institutional signal versus a track signal. I think it's now more typically separate signals, but there aren't that many programs with research tracks, so it's a great opportunity to, it's a great question for program coordinators do they have separate signals for their two groups or not? Because we don't want to give you blanket advice that might not be correct here.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that if you are applying to both, for instance, in our program, both the clinical and the research track, and we know that you have signaled one, I think we kind of assume that you're interested in both, if you've applied to both. But I would, again, definitely ask.
Great. Can you expand on the dynamic differences between research track programs and normal programs? Judy, I'll give you that one again. You're on a roll.
So the for again, each program is a little different. For us, it's that we are funded by NIH, and so we have a separate track where 2 residents out of the 5 have an additional 2 years of research. So they're basically taken out of the clinical research program and I'm sorry, the clinical residency program, and they do 2 years of research and then come back after those 2 years. Our calendar is and the tracks are made for it. So it's always 5 clinical residents every year, and so the rotations show that. There are other programs who have residents start in research even before the clinical residency program begins. There are others who have them in the middle. So unfortunately, every single research track is a little bit different in the way that they're configured. And so again, please do your homework, contact the program director or program coordinator, look at their website and see how they do it.
Great. With only 13 osteopathic programs, what is the value of signaling to DO students? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
I'd just say, I mean, as a DO student, you can signal allopathic residencies as well. So, you're not tied to just those 13 programs. So you would, if you wanted to, signal those 13 programs, that you still would have 12 more signals to go towards allopathic residencies. Hopefully that answers the question. I mean, that's the way I'm reading it.
Yeah, no, I think that I definitely agree, Eric. I think, there's been a general move for breaking down barriers between allopathic and osteopathic programs. I think there's still, there are still some cultural differences that persist. But our program certainly receives a number of applications from DO applicants every year. And I think that, certainly having a signal associated with that makes it more likely for us to pay close attention to Does the requirement for visa sponsorship for a US trained graduate negatively affect their chances of matching? So I think we discussed that, I think, in terms of the institutional differences for visa sponsorship and kind of learning, trying to figure that out as you're making decisions related to signaling. Do programs do virtual interviews for applicants that have done away rotations at their institutions? So it's a good question. I think clearly part of the value of an in-person interview is that, getting to know the culture of the program, et cetera. And so what do you do with visiting students who have done an applicant who have completed a rotation at your program and then are applying after that? Do you still bring them back for an in-person interview? Do you do that as a virtual interview? I'll open up to the group. I think it's going to be variable from program to program. I think it'll be a program-specific decision. But Eric, Judy, your thoughts or comments?
Yeah, so we did in-person interviews last year, but we did, to give our home students and our away rotators an opportunity to do a formal interview, just to try to have some consistency across that. We did virtually interview our home students and our away rotators to have that kind of consistency with the questions, because the way we run our interviews we have a certain 1 or 2 questions per room with each interviewee that we ask all applicants just for consistency. And then you may have some other questions that are kind of asked, or discussions based on, your own specific application, but we do have some generalized questions that are asked to everybody. And so we wanted to give that opportunity to do that. Same thing with our away rotators and our home students, but did not want to make our away rotators come back and fly back here. So we did that session and anticipate that we'll do that again. But you're right, Steve. I don't anticipate that all programs are going to do that, but that's certainly just the way we thought of it.
And actually, we did the exact same thing for the away rotators and the home students, that we did a virtual interview because of this very same reasons. We have a standard interview question that is asked, and everyone usually has some favorite questions of their own. So we wanted to give everyone a chance also to meet all of the different faculty who are interviewing, because you can't meet everybody within a department.
Yeah, I think, we have been virtual up to now, but we'll be doing in-person interviews this coming year. I think for us, I think it's likely that we will do only in-person interviews, and that will include our away rotators, largely because I just worry that they will be not the sort of recency bias and things of having a group of applicants here in person. I think it'll be hard to match that in a virtual format, even if it's someone that we already know from an away rotation. So I think that that's likely the approach we'll take, but I suspect there will be variation from program to program. Okay. Advice do you have for students specifically without home programs? Use your signals, find mentors when you do an away rotation. There is through the Academy, there's a mentorship program where faculty sign up to be student mentors. So you can, that's another opportunity to find someone to help give you guidance. Judy, Eric, other thoughts there?
No, that's the same advice I would give. Yeah.
Okay. Appropriate etiquette for letters of intent following interviews. I have the same question for thank you notes as well. So this is post-interview communication discussion. There's a lot of talk about this in various circles, I think. Controversial topic. Eric, you want to start with it?
Sorry, I was muted. So I can say that as far as the NRMP is concerned, the only thing programs or applicants cannot do is ask the other where they will be ranked. That's the only rule that is out there. So I cannot ask you where you're going to rank me. You cannot ask me where I'm going to rank you, but you are able and allowed to contact programs and tell them you have significant interest in them. As far as how that would be perceived at the programs, I think is going to be very program specific. And I can't pretend to give advice on, what other programs would do with that information. But I can say that I was just at an RMP function in December, and they were clear to kind of say that is what the interpretation of the rules are. But I don't really know what else to say about that.
Judy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have post-interview communications, having a thank you note, but I don't think less of the applicants who don't send one or don't tell me where they will rank me, our program. On the other hand, if an applicant says they're going to rank us #1, that's nice to hear. But normally we actually don't take that into consideration. Again, that's the way that we do our ranking. But every program is going to be different.
Yeah, I'll get on my soapbox a little bit and just say that my personal opinion is it's fine, it's fine to send things to our program after we on our interview days, whether it's virtual or in person. We meet right after we complete those interviews and go through our assessment process. And then we have a set of scores that we don't change based on any communication or things like that. So I think that's true for many programs, although there is some program variation. I also, although it's not a violation for programs to reach out to applicants and say things like, "Hey, it was great to meet you. We really liked you," or "Do you have any questions?" or anything like along those lines. My personal opinion is that it's a little bit coercive. Some of the communication that can happen in that setting, and also the kind of discussion that can happen in response to various applicant-initiated communications. So, in general, when I receive something communication after the interview process, I try to write back and say, "Thanks, it was great to meet you," and a relatively generic acknowledgement, but I try to leave it at that, and hope people don't read too much into that, because I do think that there can be some funny business that happens in the post-interview communication setting. All right, I want to be a little mindful of time. 6:27, 13 open questions. So I'm guessing we're not going to get to everything here. We have couples match and competitive specialties. We have a couple of questions about international medical student graduates. We have a question about rural ENT. We have a question about not accepting an away after it was offered due to scheduling conflicts.
I was going to say that one might be good to answer, just because I've
Yes.
definitely had my mentees ask questions about that. I can tell you, I can just say personally in my program, I have absolutely no clue who it's all kind of handled through our program coordinator. So, I mean, we review applications and then, make recommendations and rank, but they're kind of who are offering and scheduling. And so I don't know, who is scheduled or who is scheduled, and then if they cancel or something like that, that information never makes it to me. But I mean, it may certainly in other programs, but I guess I would say, kind of do what you have to do to get the experiences that you want to get to make the best educated, decisions on kind of where you want to go or what you want to get out of the away rotation. I mean, you kind of have to make those decisions for you and what's best. But hopefully the programs wouldn't negatively, it wouldn't negatively impact their decisions on interviews for you. But I don't know if you all feel differently, but.
Totally agree. I think could not accept is also different from late cancellation. So those two things, just communicate clearly, and I don't think programs in general it's tough to be organized enough to figure out who didn't accept your interview offers and carry that through to later parts in the application process. And the bottom line is too, we all understand that it's challenging to schedule away rotations, and that there are going to be times when people are offered a position that they can't accept, and that's totally understandable. Maybe I'll hit the rural one real quick. That's part of the geographic preference, was also the rural urban part. So that may not be part of the system anymore. I suspect it won't be in this upcoming year. And so I would suggest, if you're interested in rural ENT, then you should kind of designate your signals appropriately. And I think reaching out to programs to you know, kind of ask them about their and seeing kind of what their graduates end up doing, talking to other residents can be helpful in that area. Anyone with, go ahead.
Just that last question about like this is a question I get all the time too, is like, you know, who should be writing letters of recommendation? And if you do away rotations, what should you get letters from your away rotations? And I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about that.
So I tell the students, only if you feel like you got to know someone really well and that they told you that you did really well and they're offering to write you a letter, then I would say go ahead. But I would say you want people who know you well, regardless of who that is, because then it does come off as being superficial and doesn't really help you very much.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just gave this advice yesterday is, you know, on your away rotations, you do not need to get a letter from the chair of the away rotation that you go to if you spent, you know, 45 minutes with them in a one-on-one before you left. I mean, so really exactly what Judy said is you want people who are going to write you great letters, and that's it. And so if that's at your institution, that's great. If you went to an away rotation, had an amazing experience with one of the faculty there, and it wasn't, you know, their chair, then that's the person to write that letter for you. So
I'll just add that, and I'll be a broken record here, talk to the residents at the program too when you do the rotation. There are some away rotations where it's kind of like everyone gets a letter from the same person type thing, and that's just sort of the culture of the rotation. So talk to the residents there. They'll give you a little bit of a sense as you're getting started, you know, kind of what the lay of the land is with that. But I definitely agree with the other advice. From when to when will interviews typically be offered? We're in the process of putting together a calendar that will go up on our website. I think the kind of hot times are from December and January in general, but there'll be some fringes probably on both ends of that, would be my suspicion. We got letters of recommendation.
Second and third week of January are going to be pretty heavy. That generally, like that second, third week of January are pretty much multiple programs every day, probably. So.
All right. Additional information to add. I think it's totally reasonable to reach out to the program coordinator and just sort of notify, hey, just, you know, also if you've already been selected for an interview, you can, you know, if you have something important to add, you can, you know, comment on that at the appropriate time during your interview time. Usually there are people asking about your research, and you can, you know, kind of update things along those lines. How about couples matching? I think that overall, my sense is that signals can be helpful for couples matches because they can kind of concentrate your efforts in a combined way. And so, you know, kind of applying to programs outside of your signal group, you know, it depends a little bit on if, you know, it's very likely that the two different specialties will have different numbers of signals. So you'll have to kind of geographically make some choices along those lines. You know, it is a setting where if I think it's reasonable to update a program that your you know, that your couple, your partner received an interview offer from their, you know, from the corresponding institution, that you remain highly interested, those types of things. Any other advice from the group?
It's just challenging in general, we know, because especially if they also use a common interview offer date, then it's, you know, it may be that it's the same weekend and so it is difficult. So I just think just trying to concentrate your signals into different cities where both of you have programs that you're interested in.
And I'll add to that, don't forget about the proximity of cities, because in Lexington here, we're fairly close to Cincinnati and Louisville. It's only basically an hour apart. So obviously places like Chicago, New York, et cetera, have, you know, multiple programs, but there is that possibility as well. And I know here we've had an ER physician who did residency here, and his wife did a program in Louisville. So that actually worked. So.
Good. Let's get a couple a couple comments related to IMGs. So I think one of the biggest challenges for IMGs is that a lot of the application assessment is in letters of recommendation and the sort of and those types of things, and that's more challenging for international students. So I think it's important to have some connection to a U.S. program and some mentorship beforehand for people who can advocate for you, write strong letters for you, and kind of help you through the process. I think that would be the key piece of advice that I would provide. Other comments from others? All right, how about latecomers to otolaryngology? Eric, you're unmuted, so you.
Okay. I think, what I talked about before is the importance of mentorship, right? So I think you really are going to have to work with your mentor to see what you can do to kind of make your application, as good as it can be. What is going to be your disadvantage in coming late? I mean, it's not going to be your kind of other experiences, your kind of background, your letters of recommendation. Certainly, if you've come to the decision of doing otolaryngology, you must have spent some time in your department to be able to come to that decision. So you should have some people that you've kind of worked with. Where is a traditional weakness in somebody that has come to otolaryngology late? It's probably going to be the research. And so otolaryngology specific research. So then the question is, how much does that matter in reviewing an application? I mean, I think if you have a really strong research background that is not otolaryngology specific, and you can kind of explain that, you have opportunities within your application to talk about these types of things, and your personal statement, and say, I came to otolaryngology late, but I, had this other experience, and it was very useful for me in understanding, scientific methods, and I feel very strongly in my ability to do that, and I just need to continue that when I have my otolaryngology residency, and I can take what I've learned there and utilize it through my research block in residency and things like that. So I mean, you have opportunities to explain these things. So it's really just kind of working with your mentor and kind of figuring out how to present those things in the best light. Would be, I guess, what I have to say. But I mean, and just explaining, how you came to that decision, and, how that this is now the right choice for you. And it just took you a little while, or, it took you to get that exposure and your school doesn't offer it earlier on, or whatever the case may be for you, just kind of explaining that in your personal statement. I don't know if you guys have other stuff to say about that. So.
But I would also add, if you have someone who can write you a strong letter, from the otolaryngology faculty, and they've gotten to know you and can kind of vouch for your interest just because you didn't have the opportunity to experience otolaryngology earlier on, I think that is also very helpful.
So we're 6:38. We got 3 questions left. Maybe we can hit these quickly, and then apologize to everyone for running a little bit late, but a lot of good questions here. Central list for program-specific social media outlets. I'm unaware. Recommend someone create an auto-match list for that. Maybe it'll fill up, and you can crowdsource that and go from there.
Although I would recommend, Stephen, this, this is something we can talk about, but I mean, as we do our interview calendar, maybe we offer up virtual open houses as well on that calendar.
Yeah, I do wonder what the virtual open houses really came to be during COVID. At least that was my impression. I wonder how much they will kind of cycle out of
with in-person interviews,
and things. So I'm not sure about the long-term impact of that. We'll see. Open the possibility of arranging virtual interviews for visa requiring IMG applicants if you're doing in-person interviews. I would say I think it's unlikely that programs will change their interview format for a specific applicant. If they're doing a mix of formats, then perhaps, but I think it's probably unlikely that in general a program would change their interview approach for conditions for a specific applicant. And then last one here for letter writers, do you expect standardized letter recommendation that our organization has put out in the past, or more traditional page-long or so documents still commonly used. Brett, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I don't know that any of it is totally required. I think most that I see have that kind of that graph, that Likert scale, if you will, along with a few paragraphs of kind of narrative about the applicants. Those scales tend to be skewed far to I guess it'd be towards the left-hand side whenever I see it. So basically, the only thing I look at on those standardized is if there seems to be a mark way to the right, that kind of raises an eyebrow, and I look into that a little bit deeper. And so, yeah, but as far as I know, nobody requires any one format or the other. They're just looking to try and get a general gestalt from those letters about the applicant.
Yeah, I would say most of the standardized letters are basically, come with an add-on stapled on paragraph letter after that. So it's sort of like a duplication instead of a standalone in general. So, all right, we made it. Thank you, attendees. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Beth. Again, this should be up on the website. And wishing best of luck to everybody.
Right.
Right.